Hello everybody. Hope everybody's doing well today. I don't know about where you are. I'm in Kitchener and it's not snowing. It's a miracle. It was snowing so much yesterday. We got so much snow, but I'm sure people far north of me have way more snow, so maybe I shouldn't complain. But I'm ready for some sort of southern vacation, which I won't get, but I can dream, you know, keep the picture of the ocean on my computer screen. So we're just seeing people pop in. Karen's our moderator, of course, from QUILL Literacy Network. She's keeping me on task. Are we waiting for anybody else?
Most people are here.
Great. So maybe we'll get going. As some of you know, or hopefully all of you, I'm Ramsay from Project Read Literacy Network, and we're happy to be working in partnership with QUILL Network to present developing task-based authentic learning activities, or tasks, as we'll talk about them today. And you've signed up for the 3 webinars. There's my face. There's my co-presenter, Jane Tuer. That's her dog. She's sick today, but she's going to join us hopefully next week and the next Thursday, because you're on hook for 3 Thursdays, so thanks for carving out that time. I know everybody's really busy, but I hope that you'll get stuff out of it that you can immediately apply to your practice and what you're doing with learners in your agency. And as you can see here, our first webinar, we're going to do parts A and B today. In the next couple hours, we'll probably have a little bit of a break and be, halfway through, unless people feel like, no, let's keep going. And we're going to really just, we'll set the stage, the context for introducing what are tasks versus skill building activities, the introduction to complexity, just start to delve into that, which is quite important. Then in the second webinar, part C, we'll really delve into more about the complexity scale, task checklist, what are tasks all about, how do I start matching them up with the OALCF competencies. A tip, if you have the TEAL book, the OALCF competency book, originally published by Ministry of Training College Universities, you may want to have that handy, as well as, of course, the practitioner guide that Karen sent you for this workshop, for this webinar series. So two documents to have handy. And then in the third webinar, we're really going to get in depth about complexity. How do you control that? How do you use that to help learners move from or scaffold, as we'll talk about it, from skills, knowledge that they know to the unknown. So how do you help them increase their learning? So that's sort of what we're in for today. The whole goal across this whole project, actually, and it is part of a project, QUILL applied and got development money from MTCU to develop this training in partnership with Project Read. So we're hoping by the end of, this is the final set, the third set of webinars, by the end, 100 practitioners will have participated across Ontario, and I think we're well on our way to that goal. That 100 task sets will be developed and included in the portal. And I strongly recommend that you go to the portal if you haven't already. Not only is there like a ton of learning activities there for you and your learners, but you'll be contributing to that portal. So for the price of developing one, because hopefully you caught on to the idea, we will be asking for a final assignment, which is a task set. For the price of doing one, you'll get back hundreds more. So that's a good bargain, I think. And by the end, we hope you'll know a lot more if we look at the outcomes, understanding how tasks are different from skill building activities, how to create task sets, high quality task sets, how to dissect them into the OALCF competencies, and then of course how to control their complexity. So we know that you know lots of stuff. You know what? There's no doubt we all have always had, and I'm going to ask you a few questions about yourself in a few minutes. There's no doubt that we've had a really great group of knowledgeable practitioners at all the webinar series, and a real range of experience from people that are maybe more novice, newer into the field, less than three or 4 years, to people who've been in the field, 5 to 10, 15 years, and very experienced people as well. And they're all taking this. For some of you, this may be a confirmation of things you already know. You may be adding, I hope, adding new information to what you already know. For some of you, this whole thing may be brand new. So as I mentioned before, we're adding new knowledge onto your existing knowledge. And so one of the things I often say is slowing down to speed up. And by that I mean slowing down to think about what's really happening, being more conscious, paying more attention to what's really happening when you're making a task set. Not only what is it, but when you're creating them, what's going on, so that the more you know those steps intimately, then they become automatic. Then you can speed up and just produce them, quite quickly and quite easily. But sometimes it pays to kind of slow down, pay attention, analyze all the little steps going into developing a task set so that you can go faster in the long run. We do ask you that you attend all 3 webinars. There's different information in each webinar. We've adapted these from a full-day workshop, a face-to-face workshop, so it's been interesting to adapt it to this kind of platform. I think it's been working fairly well, and we've made improvements all the way along, so I think you're getting the best version of the 3 if you're coming to attend today. And hopefully we'd like you to get the most out of the webinar by doing the homework activities. It's up to you ultimately, but certainly reading the practitioner guide, doing the activities will help you hone your skill to be able to apply the information we're sharing with you today and the next 2 Thursdays. And of course there will be homework, a little bit of homework, not tons, and of course a final assignment, and we'll talk more about the final assignment. So we'll move on from there. So our agenda today is to really go over, to set the stage, to set the foundation about what is a task, the steps to doing that, introduction to complexity. My goal is that you leave with more information than you came with, and that it really adds to how you approach learning activities and tasks. And I do think it's a helpful approach for learners because tasks are very much situated, as we've got here, situated in authentic or real-life kind of experiences. Now, the authentic experience could be any one of the 5 pathways that we work in. So employment, secondary school credits, independence, post-secondary, and apprenticeship. And of course, even apprenticeship has sort of 2 aspects to it. It has the on-the-job piece, and it has the in-school portion, which really is post-secondary training. So what are tasks? Tasks are about creating, as I said, replicating or recreating, I should say, authentic experiences. It's on recreating the situation, conditions, and the document, and it's always the use of integrated skills, to accomplish that. It's like a demonstration of learning. If people remember Demonstrations Ontario, which is still an active website, milestones and accumulating tasks are integrated demonstrations of skill. It's where the learner is applying their skills and knowledge together in a context, in a specific context. And it's really it's an important part of learning, because we can do the skills development, and I'll talk about how they're linked, but if we're not encouraging any application of skills to contextual situations, then how do we know that they're going to be able to use the skills and knowledge out in the real world? Because really, if we're learner-centered, it's about what they can leave with and apply later, not just sort of how many books they fill in or handouts or whatever. And as it mentions there, more about this on page 3 of the practitioner guide. And I've got those references throughout the slide presentation, so if you're looking for a bit more information, look at that. Okay. And by all means, I should have encouraged you earlier, but if you have any questions, please use the question box. Karen will stop me from time to time to address any questions that pop in your mind, rather than waiting to the end. We won't have a specific Q&A time, but certainly as you think of things, by all means, put them in the question box and we can address them right away. So I'm going to talk a lot about tasks and task sets. And tasks are questions. Those two terms are used interchangeably, task, question. A task set is usually a set of 3 to 7 questions associated with the same authentic document. Now, the other thing they can be associated with is an authentic scenario. So not a pretend one, not a made-up one, but an authentic scenario where you write out, you know, an authentic scenario might be if you're in a phone answering position and you set up a scenario that talks about talking on the phone and taking and receiving messages, let's say. That's something that would happen authentically on the job. So that would be an authentic scenario. But most of the time you're going to be working with authentic documents. In other words, documents that come from the context that you want to help somebody apply their skills in. Remember, this is integrated skills. As I say, three or more questions. Each question, and these are sort of some of the golden rules of task sets, each question or task needs to be independent from one another. So the answers can't affect one another. Insofar as what I mean by that is, if they get, let's say there's a set of 5 questions, and if they get the answer to number 2 wrong, it won't necessarily make them get numbers 3, 4, and 5 incorrect. So you want to make each question somewhat independent of one another. And usually it begins with the easiest question and builds in complexity. You're drawing people into the authentic document. Also, the first question usually starts with something simple that is found at the top of the document or the top of the prose passage, the reading passage. As mentioned before, we talk a lot about scaffolding or bridging learners from less complexity to more complexity. Oh, I apologize. I'm just getting over a cold. And so I may have to stop periodically to just drink some water or have a cough drop. So, and we'll talk more about scaffolding and bringing people from, you know, it's built on that Vygotsky zone of proximal development, insofar as you're taking them from a zone they're comfortable in, you know, I know these skills and knowledge, to a zone that's less comfortable. And how do you control the complexity in questions or tasks so that you can slowly lead them to more and more challenging tasks? I was talking to a practitioner a few months ago, and she was talking about, you know, the let's pretend phenomenon. Just to be clear, authentic-based activities never start with pretend you are. You know, it's not about making up things. Now, I mentioned authentic scenarios just a moment ago. That's because the scenario is described and based on something happening in the workplace or in a particular situation, whether that's one of the other pathways. But it's a conscious effort to replicate a realistic context for learning. It's not sort of something that's outside of experience or completely based on conjecture about a particular job or post-secondary program. It really has to be based on a bit of an investigation about what's realistic. Now, this is a key thing. What's the difference, and this gets asked all the time, what's the difference between tasks and skills development? Well, both are needed and both enhance a student's learning, but tasks are about the application of integrated skills. And skills development focus on discrete skills and that are not usually based on authentic situations. So it allows for that skill practice and enhancement. And I've got a couple examples there of spelling tests or multiplication tables. It could be, gee, I need to, you know, maybe your learner, you've through assessment found out they're not so good at punctuation. So you may do a series of activities, learning activities that are just solely on applying punctuation. That's a skill building activity. But when they apply it, let's say they're building up their punctuation skills so that they can write business reports, you can see how that's integrated skills being applied in a particular situation. Karen, do we have any questions so far, or are we okay?
No, so far we're okay. Yeah, I do have the question screen up on my monitor, so at any time you can throw a question up and I'll see it come up right away.
Great. So the next rule of thumb, and I couldn't put this in big enough print, level the task, not the document. Level the task, not the document. And one more time, level the task, not the document. When I took my original training, both Jane and I have taken our certified trainers with Skill Plan BC, who originated making workplace authentic tasks. When we took our training, this was completely hammered into our heads, but with good reason, because people often say to me, my learner can't work on that document. It's much too complicated. But if it's the document that exists, let's say it's a job application from a particular company in your town, if that's the application itself, and yes, there are learners that may not have enough skills to adequately tackle and complete that job application as it is and where they're at today. It's not the document that you level, it's the tasks. So then you start to control the task complexity, how difficult they are. And you can ask very simple tasks or questions of complicated documents. So it's the tasks that you start to match with your learner. So, and in controlling complexity, you may be leveling tasks and writing tasks that are all within OLCF level 1, because let's face it, the OLCF levels are quite large. As you well know, levels 1 to 3 in the OLCF competencies have been articulated with the essential skills or IELTS levels 1 to 3. So those are very large levels. So you can have questions, a set of questions that all remain at a very low level if that's the level of your learner, and if you think that putting in lower level tasks is enough of a challenge for that individual. So hopefully you can start to see how these kind of go together. It's about how you write and how you control the complexity of the task, not the document. Okay, so how does this all fit together? Well, definitely it does. I sometimes see the right side of the screen, the task sets, as the individual needs, and the skills-based as curriculum. We're always doing this with learners. We're always spiraling up. They come in, we determine their skills and knowledge that they currently have. We do goal setting with them. You know, why are you here? Why do you want to learn? And then we may look at the discrete skills and say, gee, they need to practice these particular ones. I used the punctuation example a moment ago. And so you may do that, you know, pick up some curriculum, some pre-made books that do maybe some drills around punctuation. And then you say, okay, well, let's apply that. Let's apply those skills. Let's see how you're able to do them in a different situation. So then you do task sets. You know, just like you use the milestones and the culminating tasks, those are integrated. And in that case, you're using them specifically to then report their learning progress on the EOIS cans. But certainly you can see how these fit together. You discover what their individual needs are. You have them do a task set. Oh, wow, they seem to need work in this skill area or this knowledge area. I need to go back to, I need to spiral around to the other side, do some more of that. Now let's try an integrated task. So you can see how these complement one another. So hopefully many of you have heard of Bloom's taxonomy. It's one that's very popular in education, and it's all about the things that learners can do. It's about the types of cognitive processing that really anyone, not just adult learners, but all of us go through in the learning process. And this is Bloom's pyramid. And he had an old version, but I've just put up the most current one that he revised. And from the Bloom, the reason I'm bringing this up is because from this taxonomy, which I'm going to explain a little bit more, Peter Mosenthal developed the Mosenthal taxonomy, and it is the backbone of controlling complexity. So let's go from the Bloom's taxonomy. So at the bottom we have remembering. So some of the verbs or activities, actions surrounded with that, sometimes you'll hear things like define, duplicate, list, memorize, recall, repeat, reproduce. These are all remembering cognitive processing activities. Then we move up to understanding, and he really felt like developmentally people had to sort of, move from the lower levels up to the bottom levels, but that you couldn't sort of jump over, that you needed to have good foundation before you could move on to higher orders of cognitive processing. Understanding, that's things like classify, describe, discuss, identify, locate, recognize, report, select, translate, paraphrase. All those things are involved in understanding. Applying, the next level up. So you've got remembering, understanding, applying. It's about how can the student use the information in a new way. So you might hear things like choose, demonstrate, dramatize, employ, illustrate, interpret, operate, schedule, solve, use, write. These are the things that are involved in applying. Then you move up the ladder again to analyzing. So can the student distinguish between different parts? That's what's happening in analyzing. So some of the things that get asked are appraise, compare, contrast, criticize, explain, differentiate, discriminate, distinguish, examine, experiment, question, test. These are all associated with analyzing, so taking information, analyzing it. Then we move up to evaluating information. Can the student justify a particular stand or position or decision? So in this level, they're doing appraise, argue, defend, judge, select, support, value, evaluate, justify. That's what's happening at the cognitive level of evaluating. Then at the very top level, you're creating. You're creating new information, new points of view, new opinions, even new products. That's what creating is about. So sometimes you hear assemble, construct, create, design, develop, formulate, persuade, write. All these things go into that level. So as we look forward to the next slide, this is the Mosenthal taxonomy. Now, in your handouts, I've sent the Mosenthal taxonomy, and I've sent it. We've got this slide. Sorry, I'm just looking at the handouts at the same time as talking to you. I've sent one with a ladder on it to represent how sort of laddering or scaffolding happens across the Mosenthal taxonomy. So let's take a look at this slide. So as I said, Peter Mosenthal and Michael Hart got together, two researchers, and they started to develop really not only the backbone of complexity for creating tasks, but this is used completely in how the IELTS was developed and the questions used in the IELTS. So that's the International Adult Literacy Survey, and it's still employed in the PIAC, the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies. So this cognitive processing and the complexity of cognitive processing is used. So we're going a bit theoretical right now, but I'll bring it back to the practical soon. But it's important that you know about this because you'll come back to this table again and again as you write questions and try to control the complexity of them. As I said, it's built on the 500-point, it's the backbone of the 500-point scale, which is essential skills. And as I mentioned, IELTS. The three things I want to point out, of course, are type of requested information. We're going to talk a lot more about that in the second and third webinars. Types of processing. You can see some of the words that I pointed out on Bloom's taxonomy. See, identify, define, narrate, summarize, explain, justify, persuade. These are going from less complicated to more complicated. And then at the side you have types of match. And I'll say this again and again in this webinar. LCIG, locate, cycle, integrate, generate. It's a little bit fuzzy on that, but it's clearer on your handout. Locate, cycle, integrate, generate. So what info is given to help the learner find the answer? type of processing is what does the learner have to do to get the answer. And of course, type of requested information is what info is the learner looking for. So here they are, and we're going to say these sort of acronyms again and again: Tori, Top, and Tom. It always sounds to me like Tom Cruise, Tori Spelling, and Top Gun. I don't know. I'm probably dating myself, right? What is that, the 90s, maybe 80s? Anyways, yes, I did have big hair back then. So Tori, Top, and Tom become very important in controlling complexity, and we're going to talk about them more. But this is just to introduce them to you and to say, hey, important stuff. Oh, sorry, jumped ahead. I'm pushing my fingers a little too fast. So what makes a task complex? And I do have to say, I've listed the source here. If you Google that title, Assessing the Complexity of Literacy Tasks, you'll find quite an academic paper, but it's very helpful in getting individual practitioners, including myself, to really understand what makes particular material more complex than other materials or documents. So it's all about the structure and the complexity of process. Like, what strategy do you have to use to read or process that prose document, or that prose text, or that document. And remember, documents, we'll use prose and document a lot during this webinar. And I should say, prose refers to long passages of text in which people are, more narrative passages of text, where documents are usually tables, forms, this type of thing. So a document usually has a particular structure. So if you look at it, it's the readability of the prose and the document complexity, labels on the table, specific items in the table, or graph or chart. That adds to complexity in those types of documents. And then it's also combined with type of, there it is. Tori, type of information requested. Tom, type of match. And distractors. And in the third webinar, we'll talk more about competing information, also known as distractors, when you've got other information around the possible answer that kind of clouds the issue. And that's something that's important to help learners to get to know. But we'll talk more about that. When you look at math tasks or numeracy tasks, it's the operation specificity. In other words, is it very clear what operation is to be done, and the type of calculation? How complicated is it? That's what leads to making those types of tasks more complicated. And of course, I think it's no surprise that doing single addition is much less complicated than doing a combination of two or more of these operations. Okay, so how do the essential skills fit together? Because we've talked about sort of the underpinning control and complexity. We've just introduced that to you, the Mosenthal taxonomy around essential skills. So how does it fit in? Well, if we look at reading text, all of those essential skills fit into the OALCF competency of find and use information. Then we look at writing. You can see what goes into communicate ideas and information. So this is how skills and competencies, sometimes I think of competencies as sort of, 4-lane highways, like going down the 401. They're broad and they include a lot of different skills, where skills and knowledge are particular single lanes that are in the larger sort of 401 metaphor. So we look at understand and use numbers. Digital technology involves a lot of underlying skills, and this isn't news to people, it's just a good reminder for today. Manage learning. Of course, we've got thinking skills and continuous learning. And engage with others, communication, thinking skills, working with others. So that's sort of how they're linking up. And again, I would say if you have the teal document, why do I keep saying teal? Somebody asked me that. I don't know about you, but I've been around enough to know that every document that's come out from the ministry has always been in this bluey teal color. So I call them the teal documents. I have a whole set in my office. And of course, the latest one was the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework document. Okay, there, see, it does exist. So that one's a good one to have handy. If you don't have that in your program, you will want to go on to EOPG, which is Employment Ontario Partner Gateway.ca, EOPG.ca, and find that. Or ask your ETC where you can find that, because obviously it has the breakdown of the competencies. Okay, so what is the process for creating task sets? The process is a 1, 2, 3. Collect the documents, develop learning activities, then start to control the focus of those activities and the complexity. So we're going to focus on, in a moment, we're going to focus on collecting the documents. But just as a reminder, we've sort of categorized the 5 pathways into kind of 3 similar ones. You've got independence, which is all about, you know, real life, really anything you're doing outside of the classroom, outside of the workplace. You've got sort of academic pathways, so secondary school credits, post-secondary. None of this is earth-shattering. And then you've got work or job-related pathways, apprenticeship, employment. And as I said, apprenticeship, I've put it in purple, combination of red and blue, because it has the in-school portion and it has the on-the-job portion. So what is an employment task? Well, in each case, we're going to talk about what each type of task is, because each one is centered in a different context. And sometimes it's easier to look at tasks from the employment point of view first, because they're the least like academic tasks. A lot of times academic tasks do certainly more resemble skill building activities. And as I mentioned before, we often talk about, you know, milestone and culminating tasks. And the sorry, you know what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to read and talk to you at the same time and get a drink of water. So it's all about, for an employment task, replicating what's going on the job. So sometimes you may have to research that. You may have to think about what really happens. You may want to talk to a worker. You may want to talk to the learner, who's the actual worker on a particular job, if they've come in and they want to increase skills for that job. And you always should be asking yourself, would a worker actually do this on the job? And if it's not a question that they would actually do on the job or think, then it's not an authentic task. Remember, task questions, we're going to use those terms interchangeably. So for the employment and apprenticeship pathway, so some examples are, they usually have a purpose for reading on the job. They're doing activities throughout the day and using materials and documents to complete them. So again, the reading on the job is going to be related to the actual tasks or things they have to do on the job. They're not going to read something for pleasure. Well, maybe at their lunchtime, but you know what I mean. It could be a safety manual. It could be a procedural manual. So work-related activities in a learning program should simulate those type of tasks and allow learners to build and practice skills. So what are academic tasks? Well, as I said, they're the ones that most closely replicate post-secondary and secondary school credit assignments and learning activities. And they are very much more like, oftentimes like skill building activities. So sometimes that can be a bit confusing. But certainly you can think of specific ones in the post-secondary and secondary school credit context. You know, what would they have to be doing if they're going on to post-secondary activity, if they're going on to secondary school credit courses? Well, probably they're doing essays. Probably they're having to write perhaps reports to their professors at the college or teachers for secondary school credits. And it almost exclusively, for secondary school credits, involves academic type of learning activities. Independence tasks, this is usually the easiest one for all of us to imagine because we all have a real life, well, hopefully. You know, they're tasks taken from situations in a variety of roles outside of work, outside of a school. parent, caregiver, volunteer, member of a religious community, a mentor, a coach. You know, it could be a patient. You could be, you know, caring for your aging mother. There's lots of different situations. And that also holds a wide range of possibilities for authentic documents. Okay, 3 steps to take for developing pathway-focused ones. First, you want to collect the documents. These may come to you in a couple different ways. Maybe you've already got documents that you've collected from the past and haven't done something with them. Maybe learners bring in a document from whatever pathway they're looking at. So that could be, you know, the academic ones, the employment ones, or independence. Secondly, or thirdly, you may want to go out and collect specific documents or ask learners to help collect documents because it's related to a particular learner's interest. An example of that might be they need to, trying to think, maybe they want to get information about counseling services available in their community. So they bring in brochures from counseling agencies. There is an authentic document that you can work with to develop a task set. From getting the document, or as we mentioned before, it could be authentic scenarios that people have encountered and you write those down. So from getting the authentic document, then you start to develop the learning activities or tasks. So first comes the document, then start to think of the questions that come out of that. And then you start to decide on the instructional focus. And by that, I mean what particular, we've gone from pathway now to competency and skills. What skills are they going to be focused on using when they're doing those tasks or questions? Okay, and there's 3 parts to any learning activity. There's the actual tasks or questions, the document as I mentioned, and the instructional focus. The purpose for learning. It has to be clear to the learner, what does this have to do with my goal? What does this have to do with me increasing my skills? Okay, so let's give some examples. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
We actually just had an interesting question pop up here, Anne.
Yeah.
Can a community volunteer role fall within the employment category?
I think I would more put that into the independence category unless you were, doing some activities on a workplace. But that's a really good one because it depends on sort of the placement you're doing as a volunteer, doesn't it?
That's what I was thinking too, because I do a lot of volunteer work in the community and most of it doesn't have anything to do with workplace. But then I think about the volunteer tutors in our adult learning programs, which is it's clearly a workplace. They're just doing the work and not getting paid for it. So it's still a volunteer role. So I think it would, I think it would probably depend on whether it's volunteering within a workplace or not.
Yeah, and I think what I do with that one is find a document, develop the task, really the process I was just outlining, and then sort of think about what pathway. And it could fit into 2 pathways. I mean, it's possible to say this could fit under the employment pathway or this could fit under the independence pathway. Okay, good question. Any other questions?
No, I was just going to say, so basically the answer is possibly.
Exactly. Okay, so you can see on here, here's an example of a level 1, very low level task. They're asking, to circle, it could have been circle, highlight, underline, but circle the hand signal for stop. And so what did we do right away? We scanned the document, we looked for STOP, matched it, and then we circled it. So that's a level 1 locate. You're locating one piece of information in the document. And the reason why in the question it's spelled exactly the same is because that aids in the scanning and the locating of the information. So STOP is spelled in capital letters the way it appears in the document. So we're just introducing you to complexity. So Here's an example of a level 2 task. Which levels of apprenticeship are considered probationary? So they've got to find information about probationary, and they have to find that a few times because it's found in 2 places in the document. So they probably looked at the header and went, okay, oh yes, I see the word probationary in the header probationary period. But then they have to go back into the document and scan again. Oh look, it appears down here underneath the header apprenticeship wage scale. So they're cycling, they're finding the same piece of information, but they're doing it more than one time. That's a cycle. Here's an example of an integrate. So I've got to integrate information together to find the answer. So what is the similarity between the tail length of a standard 6 to 8 strand wire rope and a rotation resistant wire rope? So they need to take a look at the similarity. Means that they have to compare information. So they're going to go in, they're going to scan for information, they're going to locate it, they're going to do that definitely more than once, they're going to do that several times in fact. And what you see here is they've taken the assembly safety. That information in the red box is exploded just so you can see it a bit more on the left-hand side. So it's the same information but larger print so you can see it more clearly. Same with the other red box that's highlighted on the right-hand side document. This has been made larger on the slide for you. So they had to go in, locate several pieces of information, so they did cycling, and then they had to bring that information together to answer the question. So here it is in summary. And as I said earlier, I said, don't forget we're going to go over the LCIG all the time because it really is the key to processing, and it's the beginning. It's one of the aspects, but probably one of the most important aspects to controlling the complexity in your questions. So as it says here, locate is to find one piece of information. Another example is if you were using a deck of cards. So a locate would be locate the ace of spades, finding one piece of information, one card in that deck. When you look at the next example down, under cycle, locate 4 aces. So it's the same information, but you've had to do it 4 times. You've cycled. You repeat the search or a similar search several times. And then integrate. That's OLCF level 3. Not only do you locate and order all the hearts from ace to king. So you've got to find the hearts, you've got to find all the face cards and the number cards in the hearts, and then you've got to put them in a particular order. Now, if you were doing, that's an integrate, integrating information to get the answer. Now a generate, that's the highest level. That's IELTS and Essential Skills levels 4 and 5. It's certainly above the OLCF levels. And it often involves locate for not only integrating information, but then generating a brand new answer. You know, as I mentioned, I think earlier, it could be generating perspective on something, a new formula, a new product, a new opinion. So an example of that is locate the highest 3 hands for the most popular card games. And so you'd have to find the cards, you'd have to use background knowledge in order to even take a guess at the 3 most popular hands. And then you would need to use the cards at hand and try to make the highest ones without using the same, like you couldn't use the same cards again and again. So you'd have to show me the 3 highest hands based on the cards that you've picked out without repeating the cards. So the 3 most popular games, just in case you're curious, in Canada, bridge, poker, and blackjack. So any questions on that right now?
No, we're not seeing any questions come up.
Okay, great. We'll move on then. Using what you've got. So now I'd like to ask you some questions. So using a show of hands, so you've got the little hand thing, you can click on it, and that will mean yes.
Actually, I did a poll for...
Ready, do you, Karen?
I actually do. Yep.
Oh, cool.
There we go.
Oh, wonderful.
And I've got the options are,
so they can pick yes or no, right?
and maybe, if they're not sure. I threw a maybe in there too.
That sounds good. Okay, so please respond to question number 1. Do you already have documents, learning activities, demonstrations that you think could fit in the task structure?
We're sitting at about 76%. So I'll close the poll in 3, 2, 1. So we had 70% of people who responded said yes, they do. 5% said no, and 25% said maybe.
Oh, that's great. So it's always reassuring to kind of know that not only do you have things there, but you probably have materials that you can adjust or adapt. And for the people that weren't as sure, or you said no, do you think you've got some stuff around that you could adapt or collect and adapt?
Okay. I think people aren't too sure. We're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. We had 56% of people participate in this question. 79% said yes, they have some that they can adapt, and 20% weren't sure.
And last but not least, how many of you have looked at the task portal? And there's no penalty if you haven't looked at the task portal to know if you have or not, because we'll certainly encourage you to go there as you develop your final assignment.
Yep, we've got 63% have, and 38% have said not yet.
Yeah, so hopefully this will give you some encouragement to go there, because as I said, it's helpful to review task sets that have already been vetted and posted on the task portal, because it will give you a much better idea about, maybe what some good practices are. So if you're sort of at a loss of, how do I do this and what do they look like? And we will be showing examples in webinar 2. There is a lot of information. I was thinking about this today, and I realize with webinars, it always feels like a bit of an information dump, like there's so much in there. But we really need to set the stage, and certainly with this particular approach, it does have a sort of particular theoretical background, but we are going to get to the more practical. And in fact, today we're going to end off with a more practical activity. And yeah, so just be prepared. But I know it's hard to listen for 2 hours. Okay, so we're going to focus really in on collecting documents and what makes a good document. And so that's step 1 of the 3-step process. So one of the best ways is talk to people. Never hurts. I don't know if people remember the AWOL process years ago, but it was a process for not only just sort of picking up documents, but actually collecting them in a very kind of concerted effort. I.e., you would go to a workplace, you would ask for documents, you would interview the people using the document. How does that fit into the tasks that they perform in their job? How is it used? What is the context it's used in, all kinds of things. And then from there, understanding that document, understanding that job, that's when questions or task sets were made as a result. So you can go to different workplaces. You can ask relatives. You can set up an interview with a company. Maybe you've already collected stuff. Maybe learners have brought it in. There's a variety of ways that you can certainly get the documents that you need. And sometimes it's spurred on by a learner who comes and says, geez, I'm interested in this goal path. I'm interested in employment, but I want to become a heavy equipment mechanic. Oh, you don't have any of that stuff on site. So then you start to collect it. It could be that you work in a college or a school board and you can talk to colleagues in the post-secondary path. You can talk to colleagues in the secondary school credits to find out a bit more about what is it you're doing in your classroom and your program. So that's helpful. And you can even look at the essential skills profiles online, and they can give you ideas about tasks that are done on the job and what kind of documents may be used in those tasks. Okay, so what's the characteristics of a good document? And there's more about this in the practitioner guide. Well, it has to be authentic. It has to be from, it can't be just made up. It should be from the workplace, the program, the agency, the situation that you're trying to replicate in the classroom. It should be well written and well designed. Sometimes you look at a document and yes, it's from a place, but you look at it and you go, wow, it's really dark, it's a poor photocopy, it's poorly written, not sure I want to use that as an optimal learning experience. It should be visually interesting and appealing. Useful for replicating several real-life tasks, so meaning that you can get more than one question or task out of it. If it's such a simple document that you can only get, you can only think of one question to go with that document, then that's not very helpful, because you want to make task sets. You want to make 3 to 7 questions for each document. And then that it's used in real life. It's generic, meaning that it's used in authentic places. Okay. And usually, I don't know about you, but I found companies really giving, and even other agencies, if I said, I'm going to use this for educational purposes, I'd like to, be able to train the adults that I'm working with to, better fill in your job applications, and one of yours seems to be a good practice, they're usually pretty open to that. As I said, it should address the skill, job, or learning outcome that you want to work on. It should expand their knowledge. And it shouldn't require a lot of context or background knowledge about the workplace for the learner to complete the task. So you don't want to ask something in which really they're not only integrating information, but they're generating new ones. Remember back to the card example I just talked about, which is generating the 3 highest hands using one deck of cards for the 3 most popular games in Canada. And so you've got that took background knowledge. Well, what card, what kind of games are there that people play with cards, and what might be the highest hands in those? And then, as we've said before, it should integrate a variety of competencies and essential skills. It should reflect the typical tasks that workers do on the job, or that people do in the classroom, or that people do in whatever independent sort of context that we're thinking of. And it should have current standards. The example there is first aid, but it shouldn't be a document that's so old that it's really, excuse me, out of touch with what's happening on the job or in the post-secondary program. It shouldn't be too technical. If it's so filled with jargon, it's going to be really difficult for the learner to deal with that. That may be much too much complexity for an LBS learner. If it's several pages long, it's easier when something is 1 or 2 pages rather than really extensive. Now, sometimes you'll get the exception. We're going to show you an example of a task set for the pre-CAT test, CAAT test, which is an entry test often used in colleges. It's several pages, but it is replicating, something that happens in the post-secondary pathway. So there's reasons for that, but generally you want a document that's manageable, and that usually means 1 or 2 pages. That it's not gender or culturally biased, or perpetuate stereotypes, that the bilingual is bilinguals on the same page, meaning if you find 2 languages on 1 page, it makes it more difficult. So ideally what you want is that you've got the English version and the French version, or the English version and the Spanish version, but they're on separate pieces of paper. And we've sent you the document checklist PDF, so hopefully if you haven't had a look at it, you may want to dig that up or print it out. And the points in the next few slides really are reiterating what's found on that document checklist. So the information is displayed in a typical format, meaning, again, it's typical for that particular context of workplace, academic, or independence. It satisfies instructional purpose. It meets the need to teach someone something specifically which is relevant to their learning and their goals. Canadian is ideal rather than American or from another country. Contains enough info to allow someone who's not familiar with it to be able to use it. So again, it's not so filled with jargon. Has the potential for reading, writing, document use, and numeracy tasks, so a variety of tasks across a variety of OALCF competencies. Authentic. If it has a minor error such as a typo, you could correct that spelling. But you don't want to go completely changing the document. Sometimes people will say, well, I have to make up documents because they're much too complicated. Well, it goes back to my example earlier in the webinar in which I said it's the questions that you ask that control the complexity versus the document. But certainly if there's little small errors that you feel like, well, I just want to clean that up, that's fine. But don't start doing a whole rewrite of a document, because a learner is going to encounter that document in the process of their life, whether that's their work life, their community life, or going further in school. And if we don't prepare them for the documents as they're going to see them, then we're not doing them much of a service. We need to prepare them for what they're actually going to see on the job, in the classroom, or in the community. And of course, you need to get permission to use it. And in that case, we have had employers say, yes, you can use, for example, my job application, but please don't leave my name on it. So we'll, blot it out and put, ABC Company instead of, Tim Hortons or something like that. Okay, so I hope that you've printed off the 3 documents and the activity sheet, the worksheet. Those were handouts that were given to you via email.
Okay, just before we jump in, we did have a couple of quick questions there. And I have answered them online, but I just want to throw them out in case you've got a better answer than what I gave. First question was, can you get authentic documents off the internet? And do you need to obtain permission to use those documents?
You can get documents off the internet. Usually you will say on a web page whether you can use it or not, but certainly it's sort of public domain. And in most cases, you can use documents if you're using them only for educational purposes and you're not making profit off of them or doing mass quantities. So for example, if there's a job application on a website, then you could print it off and create a task set around it. Certainly I would look at the whole website and see if there is any disclaimers or any mention of please don't use this, or we have not granted permission to use it. But really, if you put it out in the public, it's usually usable.
Okay. And the other comment that I made was, remember, websites themselves can be authentic documents. You just want to remember that they're updated fairly regularly. Or at least good websites tend to be updated on a regular basis. So you just want to make sure before doing the task that the website still has the information they're looking for. So,
yeah, that's a good example, Karen. And sometimes when people will do websites, you may want to focus in on 1 or 2 pages of a website rather than the whole website. Think of the complexity that is involved in surfing the whole website, in finding information. So you may want to limit your task set to a particular page, which may make it easier, like you say, Karen, to then check it and update it.
And the other question was, is there a place to locate or upload these types of authentic documents on the task portal for all to share? And the comment that I made was the portal is for task sets. And what we do when we upload when we take something that's submitted for the portal is we go through and the authentic document is embedded within the actual file. So if you go to the portal and you download the Word file, it will have the authentic document embedded right in that file. So
yeah, so you could definitely either, look through the task sets that are already posted if you're, interested in a particular thing. So the activities are already made for you. If you're really keen, you could also download that task set, as you say, Karen, with the authentic document in it, and then make maybe additional questions or additional tasks that go with that document. Let's say you wanted higher level complexity with that document.
Right. Okay. And another comment, in a busy learning setting, I can see spending most of my time looking for existing tasks from reliable sources rather than creating my own, which is exactly why QUILL created the portal last year. We recognized that, and that's the one consistent message that we were getting from across the province, is that the other thing that when a task set has been put on the portal, and the address is just task-based activities for lbs.ca. Everything that's on there has been vetted, it's been reviewed, the levels have been looked at, it's ready to go.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, and that's why we've sort of asked people to make one final, as the final assignment, one task set, but you're gaining so many hundreds more. I mean, not only from the people that are taking these 3 sets of webinars, the 3 series, but there's so many task sets already on there. And of course, once you create one, let's say you've created one that has to do with trucking. Well, there's bound to be other learners that are also interested in that goal pathway that you might reuse them. So definitely keeping them on file, keeping them on hand to use with others. Or if you feel like, let's say you work with a group of practitioners in your organization, if you take a look at sort of the range of task sets that you already have, and you say, gee, we seem to have a gap here, and that's a really popular, let's say you're looking at the employment pathway, and you say, gee, we have a gap of not very many task sets in employment area, and you know what, learners are now coming in and asking for more task sets, they're looking for stuff to learn stuff in the trucking or transportation pathways. Then you may, as a group, say, okay, each of us will devote some time, or one of us has some time to devote to finding a few authentic documents. Or again, learners could be the source of those. Any other questions before we do this?
No. Nope,
Okay.
we've cleared the board.
Okay, that's great. So hopefully that gave people time to get out their workplace documents worksheet and the document ABC samples. Because what I'd like you to do is, on the worksheet, it asks you to, based on what we've talked about of what makes for a good document, what to avoid, what to look for, I'd like you to sort of look at those 3 documents and take about 5 minutes to complete the worksheet. And it's asking you to say, what's sort of the pros and cons or the strengths and weaknesses of each of the documents. So if you could take, first of all, can I get a show of hands that people have those documents in front of them? And I'll show you the ones I'm talking about in case people are a little bit confused. There's that one, that one, that
We've got most of the hands up. There's only 2 or 3 that haven't popped their hands up.
So that would have come in an email to you, and you may have to scroll down in the attachment window to see all the attachments. And just a heads up for the next time, we'll be sending in webinar 2, there's 3 emails, and there'll be lots of attachments, so definitely scroll down your attachment bar whenever you get an email that has to do with this webinar.
They'll all be coming out early next week. It's always a bit of a delay for the first webinar of the series because I send them out once people have confirmed that they are going to participate and they sign up for GoToWebinar. So everything kind of goes out as soon as people sign up. I send it out, but next week it can all go out in one bulk email. You'll have it Monday afternoon.
Great. So it's 2:16 on my clock, or 2:17, just switched. So in 5 minutes, 2:22, let's get back together. So take the 5 minutes and write the pros and cons, what's good, what's not so good about each of those documents. Okay, hopefully you had more than enough time to jot down a few points about each of them. And so I'm just going to go over some of the strengths, but if you have any questions, I do want you to put them in the question box. If, let's say, the explanation I'm giving doesn't seem to suit, or you're kind of wondering about stuff. So for the first document, let's take a look at it. That was this one. The strengths of the document, well, it's not terribly complicated or technical. So, you know, most people would be able to deal with it. The heading and the special notes are bold, so that's good. And the font is fairly legible. You know, it looks like some sort of handwriting, but certainly it's not so squishy or scrawly that you couldn't read it. The things that maybe are the weaknesses of this document are, it seems fairly personal. It's not clear that it's from a particular workplace or occupation. So, you know, that could be something somebody wrote at home. It could be something somebody wrote at a workplace. And the content is fairly limited. So I'm not sure how many tasks you could develop, and certainly would maybe only lend itself to very simple locate type of tasks. And the context of the document, as I mentioned before, is difficult to figure out. Are they using it at home? Are they using it at a workplace? Is it a small business? Is there a reason that they're using, you know, a handwritten note and not a form? And, you know, these days oftentimes people are ordering these types of supplies online. So maybe that would be more current and up to date. Did people have any questions about that or any other comments about this document? And please feel free to use the question box.
Okay, not having anything pop up, Anne.
Okay, so again, this might not be, it's not bad, but it's not great. It's one of those things that you may go on and look for another example.
Yeah.
Also, I was just going to add, Karen, it also means you don't always have to use everything that sort of comes into your program. You can critically analyze it and say, you know, it's okay, but it's not the best document. It's not the best example I want to use.
Okay. Just a couple of other comments that are coming in now. First one is visually uninteresting. There was a comment, you'd be able to alter it to fit. Another comment is, it's not clear who wrote it.
Yeah, exactly. Those are really good comments. So let's move on to the next one. Those are good points. Okay, this is definitely a document with a chart on it. So I'm going to go over some of the strengths and weaknesses. And again, I invite you to ask questions or any other comments you have about the document, which you can do at the same time I'm talking or after. So on the plus side, the document's a bit more visually interesting, appealing. And the graphs lend themselves to both math and document use tasks. And the page offers two document types for comparisons. You get the bar graph and you've got the line graph. The weaknesses, the things that aren't so good about it, the context and meaning of the information is hard to establish. Like, I know it says comparison of model 453 and model 812, but what are those models of? You know, it might be good if we had that. Are they lawnmowers? Are they, you know, bikes? What are they? Motorcycles? The graph is not labeled, so guesses must be made. We've got certainly labels on the bar graph, on the left axis, on the bottom axis, but when you look at the line graph, it's really not clear. Is this over time? You know, and what is it? It's showing, you know, increased popularity, but we're not sure over what time period. You know, it was launched in 1998, so is that when the data collection started? Not clear. And the details to use in some numeracy tasks are missing. You know, you could locate things, but I'm not sure you could do anything else with them. Okay, so the any other comments about this particular document? I'll give you a minute to sort of do that. So any questions or comments, Karen, coming in?
Yeah, we had a couple of comments.
Okay.
One, it's all on one page. It's not too long.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And the other question is, who's the author? He doesn't say whether it's a consumer group or whether it's a manufacturer or...
Yeah, again, it goes back to the context is not really clearly, while we want things that anybody can read, that they're not so complicated or full of jargon, but still, it'd be nice to be a little bit more clear about where this is coming from. Any other comments?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, the next one. And yes, it is fuzzy. And that's one of the things. I'm going to start off with the things that are not so great about this document, document C. The print is difficult to read. It looks really well used. It's fairly dated. The text actually continues on to another page. The uppercase letters are more difficult to read, the stuff that's all in caps. Although, oftentimes uppercase letters are very commonplace in documents and in prose, but still, in this case, it's not making it any easier to read and use. The strength of the document, what's sort of good about it, it is organized. It has definite paragraphs and headings. Important information is different from the rest of the text. They've tried to underline it, or rather they put it in all caps, so they're trying to emphasize that. The educational value content teaches about the workplace, so it is something relevant to the workplace, but again, it's a bit dated, and it's definitely authentic in appearance, in that I can imagine that this did come from an employee handbook from a company that's a particular type of office. So how about you guys? Any other comments or questions about this particular document?
Yep, we've got a couple coming in. One suggestion is the steps should be numbered. There's another con is that there's inconsistent use of bolding and block caps. The supervisor email should be specified. Question, is there permission to use the document?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in this case there is, but that's a good question to always ask.
Yeah, and another con that we also mentioned, it's part of a longer document. It's obvious that the whole thing isn't there.
Yeah, so it indicates, I mean, we've said the idea of it, the topic of it, an employee handbook, and in this case they're discussing, what to do before you leave. So in my ideal world, I wouldn't use this one, but I'd probably seek out something similar to it, especially if I had learners in my program that this would be relevant to their employment pathway. Gee, they're going to be working in administrative jobs in an office. So this type of information might be handy, but perhaps I could get a better version. Any other questions or comments?
Nope, that was it.
Okay, well, I'm going to make you, I'm going to ask you another question using the question window. Have you found, where have you found a variety of authentic documents? So if you could say sort of the source and the pathway that you've gotten them for. So where have you found, and it could be any of the pathways, where have you found good sources of documents? Because sometimes it's hard for people to think about, where can I find this stuff? And if you hear other people's ideas, it really rings in your mind. So.
Okay, we're popping up, so I'm just going to start reading. Employment Canada, items off the internet, booklets, local businesses, CAA, their magazine and online, copy/print room, college sites.
Sorry, Karen, go back to that one. Copy, prints.
Sorry, what was that one? Copy/print room.
Maybe somebody could, whoever put that, maybe you could explain that a bit more. I'm not sure I understand that one.
Okay. College sites, workplaces, the Human Resource Office, curriculum materials, It came from someone who's new in the department. Independence using the birth certificate replacement documentation.
Oh, yeah.
Food boxes and labels. We do have some of those on the portal now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, car rental forms. Not sure the question houses all of PD/HR. Colleges, credit school, employment, Service Canada online. Online courses. So college sites, ILC curriculum materials, store flyers and flyers in the mail. We have a number of those on the portal as well. Social insurance number application, passport applications. So yes, there's lots of great ideas.
Oh my gosh, you've been obviously at this quite a while. So those are really excellent ideas.
Here's our explanation for the copy print room. The copy print room houses all of the human resource forms, health and safety, accident, car rental forms. So in a larger workplace, these types of forms can all be found in that particular room for this particular site.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I just wasn't sure at first when I heard that whether they meant a particular printer in town or something like that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Other ideas, work right, and materials from learners. If learners come in with something, I'm having trouble with this, well, let's create a task around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you guys are so on the right path. I mean, you've been doing this a while, so you know that there's stuff out there. I don't have to convince you of that. It's really one of my favorite things is I often, if I'm at municipal buildings, because municipal governments, have just tons of sort of brochures that are written for the public, things like how to get subsidies for your heating or hydro bills, how to apply for subsidies to help your children join municipally run sports, things like that. Even the local community newspapers that sometimes come into your home. So you guys know this. This is great. Anything else before we move on?
No, another comment is income tax.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know someone from one of our previous webinars was creating a task set around completing the TD1 form.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yes, no end to those forms, and we're coming up to that time, aren't we? Okay, so I'm going to get you to do a quiz. We've got some more polling to do because we're pretty much at the end of webinar 1, and so we'll have some time for you to ask questions. And if there's no questions, that's okay too. So, number 1, have you got the polls ready, Karen?
Yep, I just put it up on screen.
Wonderful. So if people could take a moment and say, which is the correct list of types of processing, A, B, or C? We talked about types of processing in the Mosenthal taxonomy. So choose which list is correct. You need obviously all those have to be one of the correct ones. No, that came out wrong. I'll explain that afterwards.
Okay, so I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, we had some of all of them. We had 13% pick A, 63% picked B, and 25% picked C.
Well, it's B, so well done. It's sort, define, summarize, and justify. So I said a comment about it should be all of those, meaning in A and C, some of those are correct, but not the whole list. So it had to be sort and define and summarize and justify. All of those appear in the Mosenthal taxonomy. So that was an earlier slide, and you also had that handout. Okay, let's go on to the next one, Tory. Other than Tory spelling, what does it stand for? Tory, A, B, or C?
Okay. I love this group. The fastest voters we've had. So I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. So, and we had 10% pick A, no one said B, and 90% said C.
Wow, this is a great group. Yep, it's C, type of requested information. Excellent. And that's one of the things we're going to talk more about in both the second and third webinars, type of information, Tory. The next one, good documents require background information or experience to read or use them. True or false?
Okay, we're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. We had 9% say true and 91% said false.
Good one, it's false. Good samples of authentic documents don't require pre-existing knowledge or experience in order to use them. You want to get something that is approachable that people can use, so it's false. It doesn't require background knowledge or experience. Remember I was saying earlier, if it had a lot of jargon, if it was quite complex insofar as you'd need to really know that job, that profession, that program to use it, not a good document. Okay, last but not least, and you get to type in your window for this one, what does the I stand for in locate, cycle, generate? What does the I stand for? Please use your question window.
Well, we've got 7 correct answers, 8, 9. Nobody's getting it wrong yet. So think they got it. We've got integrate.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Thanks. That's great. That's great. Just a little quiz to keep us on our toes. Okay. So if you haven't already done so, I'd like you please read the practitioner guide. That'll just provide more background information. Gather 1 or 2 authentic documents and 1 or 2 current demonstrations or learning activities you already have, and revise them based on what you sort of already know. So whether you've got authentic documents and you review them based on the checklist and then you make activities around them, or you're adapting 1 or 2 existing learning activities. So 1 or 2 questions, that's all we're asking.
A clarification on the assignment submitted. So the homework that you gave, Anne.
Oh, yeah.
How are you going?
Sorry, and what I'll do is I'll go back to that slide. My apologies. Now you can see my desktop. Well, not very much of it. Just going to play from current slide. Okay, so going back there, this is for your practice. So find a couple of authentic documents, review them, see if you change your mind about those. Either use those or, but find a couple of current demonstrations or learning activities that you already have. So they may be associated with an authentic document that you're looking for the first step. But take a look at those activities and revise them based on what you learned today. We're not going to ask you to hand them in because there's a lot more information coming in webinar 2 and 3, but it will get you started. There will be more homework that we'll ask you to submit between the second and third webinar. But if you do this homework, this will get you started thinking about what we've talked about today and how, you know, you may have already sort of hit upon some sort of insights that you want to change up some of your existing learning activities or tasks. So please adjust those. But we will invite you between the second and third webinars. We'll give you a document and we'll invite you to send 1 or 2 questions into Jane that she will have a look at, and she'll give some overall feedback to the submission. So you'll have a chance to do that then. But this is some sort of self-directed homework. Does that make it a bit more clear?
I think so. We're not getting any more questions coming up.
Your big homework is read the practitioner guide if you haven't, and think about your final task set, and sort of once Karen sends you that link to the fluid survey, if you can get that in, because like she says, we hear such exciting ideas that then we can say, go ahead with it, or gee, you know, that's already been done, we've got lots of those, think about something else. The sooner you do that, the easier it is for you. Okay, if there's no more questions or comments, I want to thank you for coming today and look forward to seeing you virtually. Next Thursday, same bat channel, same bat place, same bat time. For those of you that watch Batman, you know, the really old series, you'll understand what I just said. So we'll see you next Thursday at 1 p.m. and thanks so much for listening.